All signs are pointing to a major panic at the Democrat disco. Now, it's not just pundits on MSNBC who are starting to worry about Joe and Kamala's staying power. Obama's now put the word out via the Washington Post and NBC News that he's concerned about his old number two. In a private lunch that was obviously not private, Obama grew animated in discussing the election and Trump's potential return to power. He even suggested to those close to Biden that the campaign needs to move aggressively as Trump appears poised to quickly wrap up the Republican nomination.
We're going to continue to do what we need to do in order to be competitive and in order to make sure we're growing the infrastructure that we need to win. One thing is that we're both aligned on the fact that we have to push back on MAGA extremists and the threat that they pose to freedom and democracy. And so we're focused on doing just that.
Okay, Obama's not the only one worried. Congressman Jim Clyburn, who helped deliver South Carolina for Biden in 2020, he's sounding the alarm.
Well, I'm not worried. I'm very concerned. I have no problem with the Biden administration and what it has done. My problem is that we have not been able to break through that MAGA wall in order to get to people exactly what this president has done.
Wait, the MAGA wall, that's a new one. Now, that's funny. The Democrats have, what, 95% of the press, maybe more, all of academia, and the entire social media world except X, of course, X, all of the Hollywood, they have that. So what they're really upset by is the fact that America is onto their game. And now it's so bad that the big guys either warning of white supremacy or at this point, he's just going to go biblical.
It's the gospel song saying we've come too far from where we started. Nobody told me the road would be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. My fellow Americans, I don't think the good Lord brought us this far to leave us behind.
Oh, my gosh. Joining us now is Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, Fox News contributor. Newt, didn't Hillary try that? She did that I ain't no ways tired. Remember, she was quoting the gospel in the waning days of her campaign, trying to get people out.
And Al Gore tried it in a church in Pittsburgh in 2000. There are certain basics that run through the Democratic Party. But I'll tell you what I think Republicans have to worry about. As the Democrats panic, they're going to increasingly use the Justice Department to literally try to destroy Trump so he can't compete, whether that means knocking him off the ballot, whether it means locking him up. I mean, I think the judge in Washington, D.C., who is a total radical, relishes the idea of an excuse to put Trump in chains, literally in chains. And I think we should not underestimate that faced with the break of everything they believe in, and that's what Trump represents. He's an alternative world where criminals stay in jail, immigrants stay out of the United States. We actually take steps to be strong again. And their view of that is that a Trump victory is the end of their world. And I think their ultimate response is going to come through the Justice Department and is going to be an effort to, frankly, with total unconstitutionality, destroy Trump as a potential contender and just literally lock him up.
Yeah, we just talked about that with Chris Landau, of course, who was ambassador to Mexico for Trump and clerk for Scalia and Thomas. And I think ultimately we're going to see how good these justices are in the Supreme Court that were appointed by Republican presidents. We'll see how constitutional they are when these cases roll up to the court, because each and every one of them is going to end up getting up there, Newt.
Look, but with all respect, I'm a historian, not a lawyer. You're an attorney. The people you interview are attorneys. They actually act as though the law matters. What you're dealing with is a team that believes in the rule of power, not the rule of law. And I don't think we can imagine how prepared they are to do whatever it takes to make sure that we can't win this fall. I'm genuinely worried for the country, really for the first time in my life. I think you're faced with a totally corrupt, radical ideology that is prepared to, in every way it has to, use every element of power that it's got. And frankly, with the federal government, the New York State government, the attorney in Fulton County, they have a lot of tools to bring to bear to try to destroy us because they're terrified of us. Well, the natural majority, they know it.
Yeah. Well, Newt, at the same time, I think we have to not demoralize the people out there to think all hope is lost. There's going to be cheating in the election. They're going to cheat. Well, OK, then everyone can just pick up, their sticks and go home. I mean, I think this is where you got to make sure that Republicans run a 50-state campaign, and this has got to be a Reagan-style landslide for Trump. I don't think this could be dabble around in the usual states of the battleground states. I think this has got to be a campaign for America, for all 50.
No, look, I agree with that entirely. My only point is we had better have a strategy, all of us who are activists, for what we do if you have a radical judge in a district that went 19-1 against Trump with a radical U.S. attorney deliberately trying to destroy the election. I think that's the great threat. I think that Trump will win. I think he'll probably win in a landslide. But notice also, your description of the Senate Republicans, they don't get it. The country doesn't want them selling out to the Democrats. The country wants us to aggressively stand up for America and take the heat if necessary.
Your message to the Speaker of the House on this so-called border deal, Newt, tonight, very quickly, one line. What's your message to him? Don't do it. Thank you.
Don't do it. Don't turn it down.
All right, Newt, great to see you, as always. Thanks so much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.